Hello, everyone. Welcome to At Percussion. This is episode 9. I'm Casey Cangelosi, and today is September 13th, 2015. With me today are my good friends Megan Arns,
Hello.
Laurel Black,
Hi.
and Ben Charles.
Hi, everybody.
So our guest today is a member of the Chamber Music Society of the Lincoln Center's CMS2, and along with all sorts of cool credentials and credits, he's a member of Sandbox Percussion, Latraine Blue, the Pittsburgh New Music Ensemble, and has recorded for several different labels, including Naxos. He's also faculty on the Dwight School in Manhattan. So hello, Ian Rosenbaum.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me.
Great. Hey, Ian, where are you coming from today? Where are you talking to us from?
I'm talking to you from Brooklyn, New York.
Do you want to shoot into something historical for us?
Yeah, sure. So this episode, if all goes according to plan, should be released on October 1st, which is just a few days after September 26th, which would be the 70th anniversary of the death of Bela Bartok. So I wanted to honor Mr. Bartok by talking about one of my favorite pieces, one of his pieces today, and that is the Sonata for two pianos and percussion. Has anyone here played this piece? Just wondering.
Yeah,
I have. Ian has. Very cool. So this is like, it's rare that we get a kind of household name like Bartok writing for, truly artistic percussion medium. So this piece it's one of his most often performed works. It was completed in 1937, but wasn't premiered till January 16th, 1938 in Basel, Switzerland. The two pianists were Bartok himself and his wife Dida, and then the two percussionists were Swiss percussionists Fritz Scheisser and Philipp Ruhlig. It was premiered in the States 2 years later in New York on November 3rd, 1940, again with Bartok and his wife Dida. The timpanist was someone I've never heard of named Saul Goodman, and the other percussionist was Henry Deneke, who was actually a quick replacement for another percussionist. Originally, the second percussionist was an older gentleman that apparently was having some trouble and was nicely let go after the first rehearsal. There's actually, in Percussive Notes, April 1994, a really good interview with Saul Goodman, who I do know who that is, by the way. There's a really good interview with Saul Goodman about his experience with the Bartok, which, in brief, Bartok and his wife came over to the States on a boat, and Bartok was bringing the score with him, so Goodman hadn't seen anything before their first rehearsal together. And Goodman was kind of given a generic idea of what to bring, so Goodman rented two chain hand-crank timpani, 25 and 28-inch timpani, a small tango bass drum, which it sounds like is maybe a surdo, and a 2.5 octave xylophone that had crooked bars and no resonators. So Bartok showed up, and clearly this equipment wouldn't do. Bartok showed up an hour late, handed Goodman the parts, and the parts were sloppy, handwritten parts that Goodman couldn't read, and he quickly realized his equipment wouldn't do either. So they kind of, it sounds like, canned the first rehearsal, showed up the next day, had engraved parts at that point, and much better instrument situation. I wanted to point out that a lot of people use 3 drums for this piece, kind of as an economical decision, but Saul Goodman actually recommends using 4 drums. So the premiere, like I said, the American premiere was in 1940. It had a kind of lukewarm reception, which is shocking to me because to me it's just immediately such a great piece. But anyway, so now onto the piece, a bit about it. The score has some interesting markings in it. One of my favorite weird markings from Bartok is it says, "Experience has proved that 2 skilled players are sufficient for the whole percussion part. Should this be, or should in this some case prove difficult, a 3rd player may be employed for the xylophone," which I think today if anyone was having a 3rd player just play the xylophone parts, we would get some strange looks. And then the most condescending thing I think I've ever seen in a score is Bartok says, "One of the pianists should supervise the percussion players during rehearsal and see that the requirements of the score are strictly observed," which, again, I don't think most scores today would have any sort of indication like that.
Those percussionists.
Always screwing with my music. So the sonata is 3 movements long. The first movement is about as long as the second and third combined, so it's definitely the longest and by far, I think, most difficult. There's a lot of like really tight rhythmic interplay between the players, especially during tempo changes. So after the introduction of the piece, there's this huge accel that happens, and the timpani and pianos are bouncing back and forth between eighth notes. And often on recordings that you hear that part is very sloppy. It's rare to hear that really nailed. And Bartok, in this movement, and all the movements for that matter, provides very specific instructions on the types of implements and where to strike on the percussion instruments, with some unusual choices, like using a wooden stick on a triangle, or a short and heavy beater on triangle, playing the cymbal with the heavy end, or with the heavy end of a drumstick on the dome, and so on. Very, very specific instructions.
There's a cymbal with a blade at the end, right?
Yeah, he says use like a knife blade, which I actually used a paper clip to scrape the cymbal when I played it.
So real quick, when I played that, my buddy Greg Salikas was playing that part, and if I remember right, it's like kind of calm and delicate, and he had his pocket knife, and he would we didn't perform it like this, but he like would hold it up and then go and like whip it out like really loud, and then
see, that's why you gotta watch the percussionist.
Yeah. And it sounds like
new.
Ben's using paper clips.
Which we'll talk about the third movement, the cymbals. There's some interesting stuff with that in the third movement. Yeah. But in the second movement is considered night music, which is kind of a term people apply to certain pieces by Bartok to just kind of describe a sound. And the description that I found was eerie dissonances providing a backdrop to sounds of nature and lonely melodies, which is very poetic, but that's actually a very accurate description of Bartok's night music that's sprinkled throughout some of his pieces. So in the second movement, there are these really dark-sounding piano glissandi with these eerie xylophone melodies that sound kind of like skeletons tinkling on top, and these washy cymbal textures. It's just enchanting to listen to. And a few other examples of Bartok's night music include his first piano concerto from 1926, which the second movement, it sounds exactly like the same texture as the second movement of the Sonata. It has that same treatment of snare drums and the cymbal and the kind of creepy piano melodies. Probably the most famous example that all of us are familiar with is the third movement of music for strings, percussion, and celeste, with that xylophone excerpt. And then the third movement of the Concerto for Orchestra all contain this idea of night music. So anyway, then the third movement of the Sonata for two pianos and percussionists, quite contrasted to the second movement, is very bright, very fun, very fast. The xylophone introduces the thematic material in this movement. The timpani part has a ton of glissandi, which can be very difficult. But one of the more difficult parts of the third movement for the timpanist is that there's a couple parts where you have to transition very quickly from crash cymbals to timpani. So right toward the beginning of the movement, you're playing crash cymbals, and then you have 3 beats to drop a pair of crash cymbals, run over, and start playing timpani. So there's some workarounds for this. What I did when I played the piece is you can actually put a very light pair of crash cymbals on a hi-hat stand, and then instead of playing, you don't play the hi-hat with your foot or anything, but you just grab the top of the stand, which there's a hi-hat right there. I could do this if I wasn't lazy. You just grab the top of the stand and you press it down to kind of crash the cymbals together. The other solution that I know Bill Mersch and John Haas did back in the day is John Haas would play the cymbals and then literally throw them into Bill Mersch's hands, and he would have to catch them so John could go and play the timpani, which is, I think, a little bit higher risk for no real gain. It is fun though. And then there's a really kind of interesting fact about the theme of the third movement. Bartok had been very critical of Shostakovich's Seventh Symphony. He said it was way more popular than it deserved to be for the piece it was. So Bartok, follow me here, this is a little confusing. In Bartok's Concerto for Orchestra, the fourth movement, he parodies a theme from the first movement of Shostakovich's Seventh Symphony. So in response, Shostakovich then took the third movement theme from the Sonata for two piano and percussion by Bartok and put it in his 13th Symphony Movement 2, which hopefully we can edit in a little clip of it, but it's that bum 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 ba-da-ding that's parodied in Shostakovich's symphony.
Xylophone lick, yeah.
Yeah, that's the xylophone. Like, yeah, and in the orchestra, it's played by the strings. In the Shostakovich piece, I should clarify. A couple notable recordings of this piece. There's a really famous one with Schulte, and for percussionist, Evelyn Glennie is playing the percussion part, which, from what I understand, they kind of took all of the good takes for Schulte, so some of the percussion takes are slightly less than desirable. My favorite recording is there's a recording, and I wish I had thought to write down who these people were, but it's two of the percussionists from Amadenda. I know it's on iTunes, and the cover just says Bartok. And it sounds like a studio recording. It is the most freaky, perfect recording, and it's cool because it's Hungarian people playing Bartok's music. It kind of seems appropriate. But then at the end of this perfect, what sounds like a studio recording, there's just roaring applause, and then that's only when you realize it's actually a live recording. It's sick. And then this idea that Bartok created with this 2-piano, 2-percussion piece is actually kind of, it started a trend of several people have since written pieces like this. The two most notable ones are probably Luciano Berio has Linnea, which is 2 pianos, marimba, and vibraphone, 4 players total. And George Crumb has Music for a Summer Evening, which is, the stage is just littered with percussion instruments. And that piece is also, we should talk about that at a future date. It's something else. And both of those pieces are from 1974. For the percussion fans out there, Nebojša Živković actually has written a piece in 1993 called Die Arten des Wassers, which is a companion piece for this as well. 2 pianos and percussion, different percussion instrumentation, but same forces, if you will. And then my favorite, I'm actually not going to be on the podcast next week, because next week I am performing the Leonard Bernstein Symphonic Dances from West Side Story, which there's a 2-piano version of that, and you can kind of cobble that together with the orchestral percussion parts. So that's what I'm doing. I stole that idea from Svet Stoyanov. I don't take credit for it, but it's a lot of fun. And then anyway, so to wrap up on the Bartok, it also exists in a concerto format. He started working on this in 1940 when his publisher suggested it. It was premiered November 14th, 1942 by a different husband-wife piano duo, Louis Kintner and Ilona Cabos, with the London Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Sir Adrian Bolt. And then Bartok and his wife Dida performed this in 1943 in January with the New York Philharmonic under Fritz Reiner, which was actually Bartok's final public appearance as a performer. So that's the Bartok Sonata.
Wow, cool. Thanks a lot, Ben. Hey, Ian, what's your experience with this piece since you raised your hand? When did you play this?
I played it a few times. I first played it, I first attempted to play it in undergrad. I think it was my second or third year, and 4 of us, none of us had ever played the piece, started to try to play it, and I think in about a semester, a little less than a semester of work, we barely got through the first movement, and I think we performed the first movement, and then that was, oh yeah, sorry. That is my cat over there. I can let him in, but I think he'll be more disruptive inside the room than outside, unless the percussion community is ready to meet him. I'm just not sure.
Let him in.
Okay.
Get interference, yeah. Ben, I think the first movement is the hardest.
Yeah, that's what I say. Yeah, the first movement is definitely the hardest.
Oh, okay. I thought you said the second. Yeah, I was saying, man, the first is so, and it's always funny when you always hear about percussionists wanting to play it, and it's like, oh, percussionists, wow, we have a piece of rep by Bartok, let's play it. But man, you gotta have the pianist want to play it.
The piano part is not worth it if you don't have the pianist, and those piano parts are way harder than the percussion parts, which are difficult enough. But those piano parts are something else.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry, Ian.
Do you guys know that John Beck played this piece twice on his senior recital?
I did not know that.
He played it once, and then there was an intermission, and then played it again.
We can do that?
You could at that time.
I didn't know we were allowed to do that. I'm gonna do that. Can we just play, can I just play my same piece over and over until an hour's up?
Well, there wasn't a lot of repertoire to choose from at that point,
Cat. Sorry, so Ian, we were
asking the percussion community. Okay.
Oh,
excellent.
Cat percussion.
I've derailed the conversation. I'm sorry. I apologize.
So yeah, Ian, when you took off, we said how difficult the
trying to.
piano parts are. And actually, in undergrad, a friend and I wanted to do that as well, and we approached the best pianist in our school, and he is really, really good. And he looked at it for a day, and he said, "No, it's too hard." And I mean, this dude has gone on and done great stuff, and he did a degree at Juilliard, and he's like a really, really, he's a great pianist. But he said, "Nah, this isn't actually doable."
Yeah, the rhythmic challenges for the pianist, I think, are different than in so much of the repertoire that a normal piano student is playing all the time. So it's been my experience too that, at least when I was in school, that when you put that piece in front of a pianist, they'd have never played anything like it. And you're sitting there doing rhythmic exercises, like everyone's clapping the rhythms and stuff like that, just because they had never experienced something like that.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Hey,
Can I add two? Oh, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead, Megan.
I was going to say, I want to add two pieces to Ben's list. Coincidentally, I just came from a two piano, two percussion rehearsal, and we're playing the piece Right, called Right by Lansing McCloskey.
I was at the premiere of that. That happened.
Really?
Yeah, at Miami. They
Oh, cool.
So actually, I played the Bartok with these two pianists, Masha and Masa.
Oh, wow.
And then a couple of years later, Lansing McCloskey wrote this piece called Rite, which is not related to Rite of Spring. It just has to do with kind of religious rites as a ceremonial type thing. So at that point, I was gone from Miami, but they replaced the two percussionists with Maria and Mitia. So
wow.
it was Masha, Masa, Maria, Mitia playing at Miami.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, the second piece I wanted to add to that list was Paul Lansky's Textures.
Yeah. Yes.
I just think that is a huge addition to the repertoire, an awesome piece. Has anyone played that?
No, not yet.
No.
Yeah.
I have, Svet recorded that, and his recording alone is fantastic. And that same recording has Threads, which is just a absolute amazing recording of Threads that actually Ian is on, come to think of it. Listen for the bongos on that recording. They sound fantastic.
Well, I have a Facebook question here. We should get Ian talking just a little more since I kind of skipped straight to Ben. This one comes from Johnny Davidson, and this is also something I'd like to know, Ian. He says, you make a lot of clean recordings. Any pro tips on how to always hit the correct notes on recording day?
Well, thanks for saying that. I'm not sure I make a lot of clean recordings, but I mean, I think I treat recordings in a very different way. Like I treat preparing for recordings in a very different way than I treat preparing for performances. The level of preparation and the way that you prepare, I think, just has to be different because, like you say, when it comes down to it, you have to be as close to perfect or more close to perfect in a recording session than maybe you're endeavoring to be in a performance. When you're at a live performance, you're focusing on a lot of other things. You're trying to communicate what you're saying to your audience. But when you're in a recording studio, you're going to be in that recording studio until you nail a take with all the right notes and all the right rhythms. So I think that you need to be aware of that when you're preparing. I like to practice recording a lot when I'm getting ready for something like that. So if it's just an audio recording, I'll record myself all the time during my preparation and listen back and see if I like what I'm hearing. That there's nothing worse than actually getting to a recording session and listening back the first time and being like, wait a minute, that's what I sound like? Like I had no idea. So you want to make sure that doesn't happen. If you're doing a video recording, I think that's also really important to tape yourself while you're preparing, just so you have an idea of what you look like, if you like the way that you're presenting the material that you're playing. But yeah, it's just a long process. You can't cram getting ready for a recording session. It takes a long time, and you have to put that time into it. Otherwise, the recording's not going to be what you want it to be at the end.
Yeah, and not to sound like a crotchety old man, but for me, back in my day when I was in college, if I wanted to record myself, it was a big deal. It involved a lot of effort. But now, like, everyone has, a smartphone, and it's so easy. I think so many people should be recording because all you have to do is open your app.
Yeah, totally.
Well, and that's probably the way to get over that red light syndrome, as they call it. Some people have no problem playing, but then once the recording is on, everything feels different inside, and they're nervous, and they, miss notes and everything. Yeah, great. Should we move on to Megan? Do you have a segment this week?
I do. So this segment was upon the request of Ben. I think it's an awesome idea. My segment is usually a current event or something very current in the percussion world to contrast Ben's historical segment. And recently, Andy Akiho wrote a concerto called the Ping Pong Concerto. And it was premiered this summer on July 18th, but it seems like the video might have just gone up recently. I've been seeing it on Facebook quite a bit in the past week or so. And I had the pleasure of interviewing Andy for the June issue of Rhythm Scene. We put him on the cover, and there's a nice interview, and he was writing this piece at that time. And Andy Akiho is a wonderful composer. The New York Times has called his music mold-breaking and vital, and I think that this piece is an absolutely, definitely fits that description. It was commissioned by the Shanghai Symphony Orchestra and the MISA Festival, which is Music in the Summer Air Festival. And as I said, it premiered this summer. It was conducted by Huang Yi, and it was a concerto for two soloists, a percussionist and a violinist, two instrumental soloists. So David Cosson played the percussion part, Elizabeth Zeltzer played the violin part, and additionally, there were two athletes, two professional ping pong players who were also soloists in this piece, and it was Michael Landers and Ariel Singh. And this piece is crazy. I mean, you've got the traditional orchestra, you've got these two soloists, and it starts pretty traditionally, and then all of a sudden, the ping pong soloists come out, and they start a game of ping pong. And so the piece really combines the rhythm of sport and music. The ping pong players are kind of playing in rhythm as well. And at one point, David goes over, the percussionist goes over and puts a bass drum up on the ping pong table. And one of the ping pong players is actually playing into the bass drum a little bit. At one point, the ping pong players are also using tambourines instead of ping pong paddles, going back and forth. And the whole piece ends with the violinist and the percussionist taking the huge bins of ping pong balls and just dumping them on the table. So it's a very animated, crazy piece, and there's video up online of it now. So we'll overlay a little bit of this over this video. But I think this is especially fitting because one of Andy's other pieces, Lignius, Ian, I don't know if you commissioned that piece or if you were the first person to solo on it, but
neither, actually. I didn't. It was for the Norfolk Festival in the summer of one of the years that Andy and I were in school together, and somebody else, a good friend of ours, premiered it. And I was looking for stuff for my recital, my master's recital that year, and he showed me this piece, and I fell in love with it. I think I performed the piece a lot now, so maybe I've been the person who has performed it the most, but I didn't, and it wasn't written for me. Okay. He's written other pieces for the same instrumentation that were written for me, but that particular one was not.
Okay, cool. Yeah, there's a great video, Vic Firth video of you playing it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and so I was also wondering, because when I interviewed him, I noticed that I think that you were maybe over in Rome with him at that time that he was writing that. Do you have any insight of where he got ideas for this piece, or what his process was?
Well, yeah. So Andy was he in Rome posing and hanging out. It was really amazing. And I went out there at the end of the year to do a concert of some of his music. And it was when he was writing the ping pong concerto. I remember we were walking around outside like the neighborhood in Rome, and we found this ping pong table outside like in a park. And so we like lifted up this ping pong table and walked it down the street like into the American Academy, and we brought it into Andy's studio so he could practice writing. I mean, I feel like we spent more time just like
practice.
We played a lot of ping pong that week. But yeah, he just brought the ping pong table in, and then I think he just got a bunch of instruments and just started messing around with them to see how he could create different sounds. I know he had met with the ping pong players prior to that to talk about how they could play rhythmically. I mean, when I watched that video, I was blown away by all of it, but more than anything, I was so impressed with the ping pong players. Just how they memorized all of, I mean, it's a 26-minute piece, and they memorized all of the actions they had to do. They knew exactly how long they had to be doing certain things, and I know that this was the first time that they were ever standing on stage playing ping pong with an orchestra. But I thought that they were amazing, all the different things that he had them do. And I guess I was just blown away by their consistency. Like, they weren't playing against each other trying to win or something like that, but to be able to hold a volley like that, or like that one moment where the one guy was standing like 20 feet behind the table lobbing these ping pong balls, and the other girl was like slamming them one after another into the bass drum. It was amazing. It was really,
It's hilarious. It's very effective. And I mean, what a cool way to combine genres, too. As I was searching for more information about this piece, one of the links came up on the USA Table Tennis Team USA site. So there's a link to it on there. And
I think the two players are actually the U.S. Olympic ping pong players.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh.
I would love to be able to hear the phone call that's like, hey, my name's Andy, so I've got an idea. Can you guys...
No, I think Andy comes up with awesome ideas like this, but I don't think he actually came up with this. I think it was the other way around. Someone called up and said, hey, we want you to write a piece, and it's for percussion, violin, orchestra, and two ping pong players. And he was like, what? I'm like, really?
How bizarre.
I mentioned, I think on episode 1 with Brian Calhoun, there's also a concerto for florist and orchestra. I would love to see these two pieces paired together on one concert.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Yeah, wonderful. Hey, let's you know, what I would say, I was amazed how natural they look. Like they look like they're playing ping pong. You know,
Yeah.
Ian said they memorized all their motions and all their moves and like the entire piece. But they also, at least what I've seen, I haven't watched the whole thing, but it always looks like, yeah, they're just playing ping pong. Like it almost just looks like they kind of dropped these ping pong players doing their thing into this, you know, into this symphony setting.
And I have a quick question for Ian. 'Cause, Ian, you've worked a lot with Andy on many of his pieces. Are there any sort of like overall insights or little I don't know, little stories you'd like to share about your experiences of working with Andy?
Yeah. I mean, Andy's one of my best friends. We met in school, and I have the utmost respect for him as a performer and a composer. I think he is amazing. If you haven't seen him perform, I highly recommend everyone checks out his YouTube videos. He redefines what the steel drum is capable of. In terms of like tips for learning his music is it's very straightforward. Like he spends so much time figuring out what he wants his music to look like on a page and figuring out the best way to write a rhythm or make a gesture work. And he really cares about that. He spends a lot of time with it. And so every composer I think is different, but he's a composer where all you really have to do is play his music exactly as it's written. Like, there are some pieces that require a lot of our individual expertise to go in there and change some things and make the piece your own. But with Andy's music, it's almost all perfectly in time. It starts and it just goes all the way through, and you just have to play it in time, hit the right notes, play the right rhythms. And if you do that, then the piece is successful. That's for playing his music, and at least for his taste, like what he's looking for is someone nailing it the way that he wrote it. That's not to say that there's no place for you to inject your personality in his music, because people perform his music in different ways all the time. But he's not really a composer that one takes like rhythmic expressive liberty with. You wouldn't add rubato in a random section or something like that, like you would maybe with a different composer.
I'm also so impressed by his videos, too. I think the way that he presents his music through some of these music videos is just really interesting, contemporary way to present it. And you're part of the No One to No One video, right?
Yeah.
I think that one particularly.
And also for me, Foundry was another one like that.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I mean, the Foundry video, that's a really funny story. We were out in Los Angeles performing that piece, and we realized after rehearsal one day, they were like, this is crazy. Who knows, again, with all of this equipment playing this piece, it might never happen again. It would be insane if we didn't record a video of this, like right now. And it was like 9 in the morning when we said this, and we only had that day to do this.
Wow.
And somehow we got some weird, it was a good friend of Andy's father owned this warehouse, like in a kind of sketchy part of Los Angeles. So we went out there. We needed like bodyguards to like protect us. And we got like a guy from the Carson Daly show was like filming. I don't know, someone knew a guy. It really happened like that. And suddenly we had these two guys filming. One guy recorded. I mean, we recorded that with like a Zoom and maybe one microphone or something like that. Really low budget recording. We just sat there for like 6 hours and played the piece over and over again.
Wow.
But to address what you said about his videos, I agree. I think he's one of the guys out there really trying to do interesting things with videos, with classical with the pieces that he's writing, at least.
Mm-hmm.
It's for him, it's a lot different than just sticking a camera out in front of you while you're performing. The no one to no one video that you mentioned, we hired a good friend of ours who's a videographer. He's a director and he makes movies. And we hired him to make that film. He's not a classical musician. That's not his background at all. Totally different type of guy. Same thing. Andy has a great video of his snare drum solo, "Stop Speaking." Same sort. He has another one coming out very soon for steel drum and violin that is of a similar style.
And that the snare drum one that Ian referred to, that's the one with Chris Lamb?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of a big deal when Chris Lamb plays one of your pieces.
Right?
And Vicky, don't forget about Vicky.
Oh, and Vicky, of course, yeah.
Well, it's so cool with the stop animation and like the moving old Apple computers.
And I think Shi Wu like produced it, or like she was somehow involved as well.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah, I remember seeing her name on that too. What was that for? I don't know.
Hey, right along these same lines, Francisco Perez wants to know, from a repertoire standpoint, what is your balance for performing and learning old works versus commissioning new works?
Oh yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I'm sure that everyone else here would agree, and the people listening would agree. One of the most important things that we as percussionists do is commission pieces. That's one of the primary things that we do. So. I try to make that a big part of what I do, but you don't commit pieces in a year. I try to focus all of my time and attention on a couple important pieces a year, or over the space of a couple years, and then once I do commission those pieces, I really try to play them as much as I can, because there are so many great pieces that are commissioned and premiered and then never heard of again. They're played once and that's it. And if this is a piece that you raised the money for and you recorded the electronics for and you did all this preparation for, and you really care about it, you should play it more than once. So I do try to take the pieces that I've commissioned and play them again and again and again. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if that really answers the question, but there is a balance, but I don't know that I have like a rhyme or reason to it.
One thing in that regard is I always like to hear a contrast of like an old piece and a new piece. So for example, like Svet, his project was basically to record, he performed the Bartok Sonata alongside Paul Lansky's Textures, like the old piece and the new piece, and it's cool to kind of see the progression between the two. And I'll do that a lot at where I teach. I do like a Ritmica along with a new piece I've commissioned or something like that.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Oh, I think Laurel just dropped out. I was going to move to Laurel. But yeah, let's do another question then while she's coming back.
I found the Shi Wu thing. She was the artistic consultant.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
And that piece was part of one of Tom Sherwood's commissions for the Atlanta snare drum.
Yeah.
We just had him on as a guest.
Really cool body of snare drum work from that competition.
We actually had him on. He was episode 5,
I think, yeah.
Something? Yeah. Nice. Yeah, that's Ben's favorite episode because Ben got to wear a hat. Stupid. Will Marinelli says, tell us some of the most unusual hobbies the guys in Sandbox have, yourself included.
Oh, let's see. Most unusual hobbies.
Or maybe just any hobbies. I had to answer that question recently. Like, Casey, what are your hobbies? I was like, man,
cats.
Yeah, like nothing really. It's kind of pathetic. What else?
I bet Johnny Allen has some crazy hobbies.
Johnny Allen, one of his hobbies, and this sounds mean, but it's not. Like, he actually loves us. One of his hobbies is figuring out the best way for us to pack our truck when we're going to a gig. Like we did a gig yesterday, and it was like a couple-hour drive away, so we didn't want to take 2 cars. And Johnny has a minivan, and we're bringing like a vibraphone, a kick drum, 4 bongos, 4 snare drums, a keyboard, like all kinds of stuff, and this big box that we fit this like one multi-percussion piece in. Sit and just figure out the best like Tetris way to put everything in there so that all 4 of us can still fit in there. And he's never failed. I mean, we could not believe that he fit everything in there.
Was it legal? Was everyone in a seatbelt?
I think everyone had a seatbelt. There wasn't a lot of leg room. There's no visual contact between the two people in the front of the car and the back of the car. Like me and Terry were in the back. We were playing Scrabble. We were hanging out and playing Scrabble in the back of the car, and we can't see and we can barely hear the two people in the front. So who knows what they were doing?
You're playing Scrabble, travel Scrabble, or real Scrabble?
On the phone, on my phone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Megan, that's what I thought. I thought like they had a board set up and they were
You
doing
agree
like
for that too?
actual Scrabble
built-in
in this
board.
really crowded car. I'm glad you clarified.
Can you actually, Ian, tell us a bit about forming Sandbox Percussion?
Yeah.
And by the way, if anyone hasn't checked out Sandbox Percussion, there's a video that I think every percussionist should see called Extremes by Jason Troiting that they recorded. It is super cool.
Yeah, that was one of the first pieces we played. I mean, we were formed by Victor actually. He had the idea to put the group together. It was with a slightly different group of personnel. A couple of the people that founded the group are no longer in the group now. But it was all it was a group of people who knew each other, but not all four of us didn't go to school at the same time. We went to the same school, so we had the same backgrounds, but we didn't all go to school. Like I never went to school with Terry, for instance, But so Victor just had the idea to get a group of friends together to read some music and just to see how it went. So we got together and we played. I think is what we did in our first couple weekends of rehearsing, just kind of to have fun with it. And it was a while.
You cut out for a second. What did you play first?
Oh, sorry. We played Mallet Quartet and the first part of drumming.
Oh, cool.
And it was a while before we played a concert. Like we didn't have a concert scheduled. We weren't even really talking about playing concerts. I think we started rehearsing in. It was in the fall actually. Our 4-year anniversary is probably coming up or just passed.
Wow.
And so we didn't have our first concert until May or something of that year. So we were just kind of doing this for fun just to see where it went. And then steadily it's sort of grown in importance in everyone's lives until now it's a pretty regular thing that we all do.
Wow, cool. Hey, let's take a question from Facebook. How about Carlos Johnson? He wants to know, what are some of the most rewarding pieces you've ever played, solo and/or chamber ensemble, and also maybe some rewarding experiences at Yale or Johns Hopkins or the Manhattan School of Music?
Yeah, well, I'm sure I'm going to leave out some important ones, but some pieces that I definitely look back at and think that they taught me a lot about the type of player that I wanted to become. Reflections on the Nature of Water, Con Variations, drumming for sure, Threads by Paul Lansky, the percussion quartet. The first time I played Dressur by Kogel, that wonderful theatrical percussion trio. All of those, I think, taught me something really interesting about being a percussionist that I didn't know before. And almost all of those I had as an experience at either Peabody or Yale, so I think that kind of...
And for me, my list of pieces is actually pretty similar to Ian's, but I just want to say, one of the most rewarding and unique experiences for me was, I think I played Threads before I played the Bartok Sonata, but you go out on stage to play Threads or the Bartok or a lot of pieces, it's like a half-hour long quartet. You go out there, you sit down behind the timpani for Bartok, you're like, I guess I'm going to be here a while, let's get comfortable. And then the feeling of actually having a good performance throughout an entire half-hour piece with no conductor, with just 4 people on stage, it feels amazing when you get through it.
The really funny thing about Threads, because 10 really short movements, all the movements are 3 or 4 minutes long. And so I remember the first time I performed that, I was so nervous about that fact exactly, but when it came down to it, it really didn't feel like a half an hour at all, just because the movements were so short,
Yeah,
it was a nice
when you're with an awesome group of other musicians, which I was so lucky to have that for both of those pieces, it just goes by. It doesn't feel like a half hour.
Oh yeah.
Have you guys seen the accompanying video to Threads?
No.
Colin McCall, percussionist now at University of Michigan, has been doing some really interesting video work recently, and I think it was premiered in Virginia last year. I think maybe Annie Stevens might have commissioned him to do that. But I watched it. It might not be public on YouTube yet, but we're going to do it this semester with the video. It's really cool.
So is there a click track to go with it or something?
Nope. It's not specifically lined up the whole way.
Cool.
but it's just kind of fluid. Yeah, it's cool.
We did that Invisible Men piece with the black and white movie and click track and
Yeah, I've seen that too.
yeah, it's fun stuff. Hey,
Cool,
Laurel, what do you
cool.
have for us this week? Now that you're back.
Yeah, I know. So, this week I want to continue with creativity. This book,
Yay.
so great. But first, I want to know of all of you guys, did you end up starting college close to home, like in your hometown, or elsewhere? I know I did my hometown. Casey was in his hometown, but what about you, Ian, Megan, Ben?
I wanted to get as far from home as I could. I'm from Virginia, and I went to school in Texas, so I was like 24 hours away.
Wow.
No surprise visits for me.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was in the same state of Missouri, but I was 3 hours from home.
Wow. What about you, Ian?
I did 1 year at the Manhattan School of Music, and that I grew up sort of an hour north of there, so I did stay close to home for that 1 year, but I ended up transferring. It wasn't a good fit for me down to Peabody in Baltimore, so I ended up going a little bit far away from home, but still driving distance.
Cool, cool. Well, I ask because what I want to talk about today is kind of how we all get started in our creative pursuits. And Csikszentmihalyi kind of calls this childhood curiosity, and essentially that every creative adult at some point realized they had this really intense curiosity for something as a kid. And he has this little anecdote about Charles Darwin and how Darwin loved beetles when he was a young kid and would catch them, and then had this little collection of beetles and he would catalog them, and that one day he was outside walking around and saw this beetle that he'd never seen before, and so he, chased over to this tree and took the bark and moved it, and then saw two other beetles that he didn't have, and then ran home, one in each hand and one in his mouth because it was so big or something. This little this little anecdote about when you're a kid and you're so excited that like nothing will stop you, and I thought that was really, really cool. But he essentially talks about that really there's kind of two main places where that curiosity would be encouraged, and that would come from a parent or a teacher. And essentially there's no denying the influence that parents have over their children, particularly if the child is talented at something. A parent can really help them to learn whatever the domain is that they're trying to do. And, we have examples of that, like Mozart. His dad thought he was awesome, and Leopold, he was a musician too, and so he took young Mozart all the way around in Europe, and he got to do all these things, but he still had to work, of course, as an adult to become someone. And it made me think back on like what made me choose music, and I know we all have our stories as far as that goes, but I remember deciding I wanted to play piano because my mom played piano, and I wanted to play drums because my dad played drums, and it was basically that simple. I didn't see anybody else, and my dad still works a lot, like more than somebody his age should work, because he loves his job. But I tell Casey this all the time. Like, I realized maybe a few years ago that I picked drums because then when Dad got home from work, I got to hang out with him because he would help me, and I remember in middle school trying out for like all county band and stuff, and Dad teaching me how to do double stroke rolls, and I would just be crying because it was so hard. And I couldn't do it, and he's just like, Laura, you just go like this. So, parents can do a lot for their kids, but of course then there's also teachers, and I think teachers are incredibly special, and according to Csikszentmihalyi, he says that teachers have kind of two main responsibilities, and they're some of the heaviest responsibilities that any person could have, really, and is to notice a student, believe in their ability, and to care, and then to show that student that you care about them, and that can be an incredibly delicate thing to do. He has a quote from a German physicist who says this really, really eloquently about when you're a teacher and then when you're an older student, and so you've kind of realized this is what I want to do. And I would think in particular you guys that went away from home, like Ben went so far from home, like you knew what you wanted to do and you knew I want to study this and I'm brave enough to go do it there, and you don't need the safety net of home or whatever it might be. At least for me, I stayed near home because I needed my parents' support still. But this physicist says, that's incredibly interesting, he says, I don't know whether the word honesty is the best word. It's the search for truth in your work. You must criticize yourself. You must consider everything that may contradict what you think. And you must never hide an error. And the whole atmosphere should be so that everybody is like that. And later, when you're head of a lab or an institute, you must make a great effort to help those who are honest, those who don't work only for the careers and try to diminish the work of others. This is the most important task that a professor has. It's absolutely fundamental. So I guess my question or the discussion I would love to open up to you guys is just where did your early influence come from? Like Ian, it seems you have done so much, and you don't look very old to me. So it's like you got a really early start. So when did your curiosity begin, and kind of how did it grow into what you've become?
If I could add on to Laurel's question, also Ian studied with Bob Van Cise, who I think nowadays it seems like is the premier teacher. So if you could tell us about how that interest was later funneled into studying with him and what you took out of that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think I'm a perfect example of what you were just talking about. Both my parents and my teachers, I think, have everything to do with my decision to pursue this, and their early support, I think, had everything to do with why I'm still doing it. I had really supportive parents. They both played instruments, but they didn't do it professionally. But so when they kind of nudged me into learning how to play an instrument when I was very young. And that did not feel like a strange thing to do because they also both played. My older brother played. So I started playing piano and drum set, and that's kind of what I did for a very long time. And then I kind of came to classical percussion late, though. I really, at that point, I wanted to be like a rock drummer. That was what I was going to do. And then I kind of auditioned on a whim for this Saturday program in the city, the Juilliard Pre-College program, which is for people before college to go in and to do an extra day of school basically on Saturdays. And I was not prepared for this at all. Like I had never really played mallet percussion, but I played the piano so I could read music. But it turned out that they needed an extra person for the studio. They didn't have enough people for the studio, so they let me go, which is really cool. And then I had this wonderful teacher there, a guy by the name of Simon Boyer. I don't know if you guys know of him. He teaches at NYU now. A fabulous player, and he had just graduated from undergrad, so we were not too far apart in age. And he really inspired me to, he introduced me to what contemporary percussion music is. I did not know it at all. So he really inspired me to pursue that, and I wouldn't have tried to go to college for percussion if it wasn't for him. And then the other big person is Professor Van Cise that Ben mentioned. I did both my undergrad and my grad school with him. And he's a really, really amazing guy. He's an amazing percussionist. He taught me so much about playing percussion, but the lessons and the studying with him also had so much to do with learning how to be, how to be a good person in our field, how to further our field, and how that means so much more than just practicing and just playing well. So I think that I strive to get a really all-encompassing education from him that dealt with every facet of what it is that we're trying to do, way more than just like perfecting your double stroke roll. Like there's lots of lessons on that, but we talked about everything, and I think that really, really helped me when I sort of decided after school whatever direction it was that I was going to. And so yeah, I think that was the most important thing, and I would say that people who are struggling with that choice, which school to go to, which teacher to study with, I think it's so important that you meet this person and you spend some time with them and you see if you guys have a good connection. and that relationship, that bond between the two of you, I think is going to be the most important thing during your entire career at school. So that, for me at least, that decision was the most important part about it.
And one thing that I'm such a fan of Bob Van Sice's teaching is that I think the mark of a great teacher is when the student comes across, very well, but not like the teacher. And like when I look at people like Ian and Svet and Jihye Jung, like these people are all great players in their own right, but they're not just carbon copies of Bob Van Sice.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say it better than that. I mean, I think that that's why being a teacher is so hard. I mean, there are lots of people out there who are really great players, but I do feel that the mark of a teacher is someone who can sort of see what a student's talents are, what they're good at, what they need help at, but what are they naturally talented at, and then the teacher finds a way to sort of let that grow. Without just saying like, oh, this is the sticking I use here, these are the mallets, just play it like this and then it's done. They really sort of see what's interesting about this person, see what kind of ideas they have, and then sort of like gently push them in that direction.
It's great that it went this direction because this was one of our Facebook questions. Eli asked what created the spark that ignited your decision to become a musician. So perfect, we got another question in there.
Casey, will you turn your camera on?
Oh, oops! Is it my sweet hand?
It's your hand. It's
hand
just kind of
eyeball,
funny.
dude. Hand eyeball is cool, man. I don't know what you guys are saying.
I just want to say it always looks like a really gross like Stevens blister.
I know. That's what I thought it was.
No, man. It's cool, man. Guys, come on. So back to Laurel's thing real quick about supportive parents. Have you guys ever seen unsupportive parents?
Yes.
It's terrible. Like,
yes.
Oh, you're talking about like a stage mom?
No,
I'm talking about like.
I guess kind of.
I have a perfect example of this actually. I have a friend right now. I won't say what instrument because I don't want to try and identify this person. But this person is studying at Eastman as a scholarship student. Anyone, in graduate school at Eastman as a scholarship student.
Chris Legel.
Yes, no. Like anyone going to that school clearly isn't just someone that was okay at high school band. Like this is someone that's a serious player. And this person's parents still kind of think like music is a hobby and have kind of encouraged this person on multiple occasions, like because she did her undergrad as a double major, and they're saying, oh, why don't you do that other thing you studied? And she's like, well, I kind of studied that in undergrad to satisfy you, but like this is what I want to do. And I think until this person lands a job that pays, a really good salary, which I'm positive this person will be able to do, like her parents are just going to be nagging at her saying like, why are you still doing music? Like you did this other thing you were so good at. Why don't you do that? And like for me, I'm very happy that she's a strong enough person and has had enough good people around her to not kind of give in to those demands. But it's really sad to see parents that are like that. And luckily I wasn't in that boat, and hopefully no one else here was.
If you ever see students that you think have like certain personality traits that you don't like, or bad habits, or something just isn't there, be patient with them, because when you meet their parents, it will all click, and you'll wonder how the kid is even alive.
Yeah.
That's what I've experienced several times.
Yeah.
I'd love to do another question because I think it's all very related, and it goes back to what Ian said with his teacher Bob Van Sice. Nicholas Hall says, in a time that's so heavily saturated with percussion groups and new music, how do you find yourself creating your own unique voice as a performer? So you definitely said that he helped you cultivate your own voice, and he didn't just make a carbon copy of himself on you. What do you think it is about your own voice that you were able to get out there?
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest, that is not something that I think about. Like, I don't wake up in the morning and say, okay, what is Sandbox going to do today that is different than So Percussion or different than Third Coast, or what am I going to do that's different than this other percussionist? Because honestly, I feel like nowadays it's such an exciting time to be doing what we're doing, because there are so many percussionists and so many amazing players, which is great, but there's also like so many more composers. There are so many percussion pieces being written now. So if you just if you want to separate yourself by simply playing other music than what other people are playing, that would not be hard to do because there's so much great music being written. There's also so many more opportunities to perform now than there ever has been. You know, we're not only looking for concerts in big concert halls at big concert series. There are so many opportunities that someone can create for themselves. So if you're a little bit creative in that way, it's really not hard to find a way to keep yourself busy all the time. And I feel like I think that's a much more productive way to think about it, rather than, I mean, it's important to differentiate yourself, but if you studied with a different person, or you went to a different school, you went to a different background, you're a different player anyway. You're not the same person. And so I think if you just focus on creating opportunities for yourself and just figuring out what it is that you love to do, and then figuring out ways to go and do that, I think that gets solved by itself.
Ian, you said something about like unconventional venues. Are there any like places, like has Sandbox Percussion ever played at like a library or something other than a concert hall?
Yeah, for sure. We did a couple in preparation for a concert at a concert hall last year. We did a couple outdoor concerts. Like we went into this park and just played a lot of music, which ended up being much more complicated than I realized. There's this whole hierarchy in Manhattan parks of the performers. Like, people were coming up to us and telling us that we had to wait like a few weeks to play, and we're like, actually, we're only here tonight, like, we're never coming back, so it's not a big deal. But it ended up being a little more complicated. But yeah, we've done stuff like that before, which is great because, you know, percussion is becoming more known. It's not such a random and weird thing anymore, but there are still tons of people who have never seen someone play a vibraphone with 4 sticks or something like that. And so if you can get to a place and show this to people who have never seen it before, if you can go to like a middle school or an elementary school even and play for a whole bunch of kids that have never seen these instruments before, then that's amazing. You sort of introduce them to something, and you could have created like a lifelong fan for our genre just as easy as, you know, you just played a little house concert, a little school concert or something like that.
You know, this relates to another question. Maybe you want to elaborate just a little more. Derek Frank wants to know, how do you create a fan base and get your name into the public? And you just said you played in public a lot. I assume there are plenty of other performers that are just as good but not well known. I'm not so sure about that, Derek, but what do you think, Ian?
Well, I think that the first thing is just realizing that getting your name out there and talking to people about what it is you're trying to do is as big or possibly even a bigger time commitment than actually playing your instrument. If you want to do this sort of thing, you have to realize that you're going to be spending many hours a day, like putting stuff online or organizing video shoots or recording sessions or emailing people trying to convince them to let you play on their concert series. I mean, these opportunities they rarely just come to you. You know, it's not like I'm just sitting at home waiting for the phone to ring and answering and be like, okay, great, you want me to play on Friday? I'll be there. Awesome. Like, no, it doesn't happen like that at all. You have to go and make these relationships. You need to play as much as you can. Most of my work comes from playing a concert with somebody at a certain place, and somebody else either knows the person I was playing with or happened to be at the concert, and because of that performance that they saw, they thought of me for something else. Word of mouth is huge. That only happens if you're out there playing. So that means that you're going to be playing in maybe smaller venues, or you won't be making as much money as you think you should be making, or whatever that means in the beginning. You're going to have to do a lot of that just to get yourself out there.
I would like to modify his question just a little bit. And by the way, I think the answer, what you're saying, is back to Laurel's topic several episodes ago about being proactive and yeah, making it happen. But I would really like to know, how do you divide this time? Do you think you spend more energy working on things in public or things to be put online? Does that make sense?
You mean, do I spend more time like working for live performances or recording sessions or something like that?
Or no, sorry, I don't know if I know exactly how to ask it, and I guess I've rolled this around my own head a couple times. I guess another way to ask it is, what do you think's more important? Having like actually going and playing somewhere live. Like, if you could spend a day doing one of these things, go somewhere and play live, or put up a good recording, what's more valuable as far as getting your name out there?
Well, if the question is what's more valuable in terms of getting your name out there, then I think probably putting up a good video. if I think what's more important in terms of connecting with a person and creating someone who is a fan of your music making for life, then I think that's going to play a live concert, because the point of the videos and the point of the Facebook posts and the point of all that is to get people to come to the live concerts, because that's where the actual connection is made, you know?
Yeah, and I think there are different degrees of what a live concert is. If your live concert is playing for a kindergarten class, you're probably not going to get a whole lot of mileage out of that. But if you're playing in Carnegie Hall, on the other hand, obviously that carries a lot more weight than one YouTube video ever would.
Hey, it depends, man. I don't know. There's lots of concerts at Carnegie Hall that have nobody there, or that the only people who were there are like a whole bunch of people who already know the music that
Yeah,
you're playing.
that's true.
Play for a kindergarten class and show that, like, introduce clapping music to them or something.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. You could inspire someone to play percussion or something like that.
Yeah, I just have this conversation with people again and again, and a friend of mine, we keep going back and forth with it, and I guess he and I are wondering, like, should we keep making CDs? Like, is it, you know, I know people are still buying them. I know they still go around, but is it better to just pursue this other thing now? Is that kind of where everything is going? And of course both are still being used, but should you just go do this other thing? I don't know. We wonder.
Yeah, man, it's tough. I mean, I'm not sure if like literally making a physical CD is the best use of someone's time or money. It could be, depending on the situation. Certainly, making recordings, I think, is still important. If for no other reason, then it can get your name and your music out there to lots of people, and that can hopefully entice them to go see you live when you're in their city. But yeah, you know, you're not making a CD to make any money off of that.
Well, and like going along with that. It's interesting, like, I mean, the parallels between Casey Cangelosi and Justin Bieber, like, both started on YouTube.
You hear that, Casey? Did you hear that?
Both started on YouTube. Both Calvin Klein both started on YouTube with, like, making free videos, and then, you know, obviously someone picked up on that, and I think Casey has a lot, you know, Casey can thank YouTube for a lot of his success, that he was able to put his stuff out there, as opposed to if some guy named Casey Cangelosi started making CDs and spamming me on Facebook to buy his CD for $8 plus shipping, you know, like, I don't think Casey would have had the same level of success, which, again, that's not to discount, you know, the idea of making a quote-unquote for-profit recording, but there's definitely merit to making things just to put your own music out there.
Well, we talked about that exact same thing an episode or two ago. There are people out there who would rather make $8 than form a connection. And,
right.
And of course, we all think that's stupid, but I would even pose to them, you're going to make more than $8 with the connection eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, like, I mean, so I think to all of us, that's like a no-brainer. Hey, Ian, thanks so much for joining us this week. This was really cool, and you speak so well, and you got so many great things to say. It's really great to meet you.
Oh, it's nice to meet all of you guys, too. Thanks so much for having me.
Cool. Well, hey, thanks, everyone. That was episode 9 of Percussion, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.